It was a warm evening in Portland, Oregon, the kind of night where the city buzzes with life but somehow feels distant and untouched. I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment, the soft glow of the streetlights below casting shadows across the old brick buildings around me. A faint breeze stirred the air, but my mind was preoccupied with something much heavier, something I knew I'd never be able to undo. I had always been careful about keeping my life in check, balancing work and personal matters like any responsible adult. But then something unexpected happened, and in that moment, I found myself spiraling down a path I never thought I'd walk. Doubt IT started innocently enough. A simple text, a smile exchanged across the room. I'd never planned for it, but once the door opened, I couldn't shut it. It was late afternoon when I arrived home from work. The air had a slight chill to it, a reminder that autumn was slowly creeping in, but I barely noticed the change in season. The moment I stepped into my apartment, the familiar scent of coffee lingered in the air, my neighbor's favorite brew always drifting through the walls at this time of day. The rhythmic sound of traffic below and the occasional honking of horns outside felt strangely comforting, like I was anchored in the familiar chaos of the city. I dropped my keys onto the small entryway table and kicked off my shoes, my mind still buzzing from the long hours at the office. I hadn't thought much about what was coming next. Life had been moving fast, but nothing felt unusual until I glanced at my phone and saw the missed message. The text was from him. For a second, my heart skipped. It wasn't unusual for him to reach out, but there was something different in the way he worded it this time. My stomach clenched as I stood there, staring at the screen, wondering if I had already crossed a line too far to go back. I walked into the kitchen, trying to ignore the rising tension in my chest. The kettle hummed softly as I prepared a cup of tea, but the warmth didn't reach me. My thoughts kept drifting back to that moment when everything started to change. I had always prided myself on being in control. Yet there I was, standing in my own apartment, knowing I was only moments away from making a choice that could destroy everything. The kettle whistled, cutting through the silence of the apartment, and I grabbed a mug from the cabinet without really thinking. My hands were slightly trembling, betraying the calm facade I tried to maintain. The text still lingered on my phone, but I hadn't opened it yet. It felt like a weight pressing on my chest, every second that passed only making it harder to breathe. I poured the hot water into the mug, the steam curling up in front of my face. I should have been focusing on something simple, like the warmth of the tea or the comforting sounds of the city outside. But my mind was somewhere else, somewhere I didn't want it to be. Just as I set the mug down on the counter, I heard footsteps in the hallway, familiar, slow, like someone unsure of their next move. I froze. Why would she be here now? My sister had been distant for a while, but I hadn't expected her to show up unannounced. Before I could move, the door clicked open. I stood still, half waiting, half hoping the person who'd walked in would just turn around and leave. But the silence stretched, and I knew it was too late to pretend things were normal anymore. She stood there in the doorway, looking at me with eyes that felt like they could see right through me. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet the accusation in it was unmistakable. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, and my body went rigid. My heart raced as every muscle in my body seemed to lock up. For a split second, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The walls I had carefully built between us started crumbling down, and I knew there was no turning back. The subtle tension in the room was deafening. My mind raced, trying to piece together how this had happened, how everything was about to unravel. I hadn't been ready for this. No one ever is. But as she stepped closer, the weight of the truth hung heavily between us, suffocating the air. She hadn't come here for an explanation. She had already made up her mind. The seconds seemed to stretch on forever as I stood there, unable to break the silence between us. My sister's eyes never left mine, and I could feel the weight of her gaze. sharp and accusatory. Each breath I took felt heavier than the last, my chest tightening with the realization that everything I'd kept hidden was now laid bare. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, and my mind was a chaotic swirl of guilt and panic. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't planned for any of this. My fingers gripped the edge of the counter, feeling the cold surface beneath them, a stark contrast to the heat rising in my face. I could still remember the first time it all started, the excitement, the thrill of secrecy. The temptation was undeniable. But now, standing here with my sister's gaze piercing through me, that same excitement had turned to dread. I didn't want to hurt her. I never did. But I couldn't deny the pull I'd felt. It was like a magnet, drawing me in with an intensity I couldn't ignore. Why did it have to be this way? I could feel the guilt swirling inside me, wrapping around my heart like a vice. Every part of me wanted to turn back, to undo everything I had done, but it was too late. I had crossed a line that couldn't be erased. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the weight of my choices. What was I supposed to do? I glanced at my phone again, hoping to find some clarity, some way to fix what was broken. But there was nothing, just a constant, mocking reminder of what had been. I could hear the silence stretching between us, thicker now, suffocating. My sister's eyes darkened, the hurt in them cutting deeper than any words ever could. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just facing her anger. I was facing myself, the choices I had made, the person I had become. The truth was inescapable. And as much as I wanted to run, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. The tension in the room built with every passing second, and I could feel my own resolve cracking. I wanted to pull away, to say I was sorry, but the words were stuck, caught somewhere between guilt and desire. I wanted to turn back, but I could still feel the pull. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter with every breath I took. My sister hadn't said a word in what felt like an eternity, but her stare, cold, searching, and unblinking, spoke volumes. She wasn't asking for an explanation anymore. She was demanding the truth. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat deafening in the silence. I could feel the sweat gathering at my temples, my hands slick against the smooth counter. My mouth was dry, and I could barely focus on the words in my head, let alone the chaos around me. The truth hung heavy in the air between us, undeniable and suffocating. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything we had once shared, the bond we had once held so tightly. The trust was shattered, irreparably broken. And now I had to choose. I glanced back at the phone in my hand, the messages still glaring at me. I could delete them. I could erase the evidence, pretend none of it ever happened, and try to salvage whatever shred of dignity was left. But the lie would only bury itself deeper, and the truth would still be there, waiting to claw its way out. My fingers twitched. The temptation was overwhelming. I could pretend it wasn't real, convince myself that this was just one mistake in a long string of bad choices. It would be easier, wouldn't it? To tell her what she wanted to hear, to lie and hope it all went away. But then I saw the raw pain in her eyes, the hurt, the confusion, the betrayal. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't keep running from the truth. It was right there in front of me, undeniable and sharp. I could already feel the weight of the consequences pressing down on me, but I had no choice but to face them. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to say it. The reality of what I had done, what I had become, was too much. But then something inside me snapped. I couldn't hold it in any longer. My voice cracked, barely audible. I cleared my throat, forcing the words out. I can't take it back. It happened. And I'm sorry, but it's the truth. and I can't undo it. The room seemed to freeze. My sister didn't move, didn't blink. She just stared at me, her face pale and unreadable. The tension hung like a storm in the air, and for a moment I thought I might collapse under it. But then the reality hit. The weight of my confession wasn't just the hurt I'd caused her. It was the truth of what this had all cost the life we had shared, the family I'd betrayed. And now it was up to me to live with that. The question wasn't whether I could fix it, it was whether I could face what I had done. The silence stretched on, unbearable. I couldn't take back my words, and now I had to face whatever came next. The silence between us was suffocating. My sister still hadn't spoken, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity I couldn't escape. It felt like the world had come to a standstill, each second dragging on endlessly as I waited for her to react. I could feel my heart racing, my breath shallow. Every inch of me wanted to reach out, to explain myself further, to beg for forgiveness, but I couldn't. I had already said too much, and now the consequences were beyond my control. And then, without a word, she turned and walked away. The sound of her footsteps fading into the distance was all I could hear. It was a simple, quiet act, but in that moment, it shattered everything. I was alone with my guilt, my choices, and the knowledge that I couldn't take any of it back. I sat down heavily on the couch, my mind spiraling. What had I done? What was I supposed to do now? She knew, and once the truth was out, there was no going back. The life I'd known was slipping away, and I wasn't sure if there was anything left worth saving. I could still feel the weight of her gaze, the disappointment in her eyes. It gnawed at me. I could already see the distance growing between us, feel the rift deepening. And yet, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to come, so much more to unravel. I glanced at the phone again. The messages were still there, staring back at me. The affair, the lies, everything, it was all just one mistake in a long chain of them. And I couldn't stop wondering what was going to happen next. Would she confront me again? Would she forgive me, or was this the end? But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much darker, something I couldn't control. I told myself it was the last time, but I knew it wasn't. And as the door slammed shut in the distance, I felt a chill run through me. What would I do now? Would I face the consequences, or would I keep running from them? Only time would tell.